Welcome to the Country Watch Political Intelligence Briefing, Quick Hits. I'm Denise Youngblood Coleman, the Editor-in-Chief and Senior International Affairs Analyst at Country Watch. Normally, in these video briefings, I start with the featured country of the week and go on to discuss other hot international stories. This week, I'm going to direct Country Watch subscribers to my Political Intelligence Briefing, where you can find coverage of these stories in detail. If you're not a subscriber, and then I would direct you to the Country Watch Facebook page, where you can find some limited content on these international stories. I'm doing things a little differently this week because I want to focus my attention here on the story of the international landscape, Afghanistan. With the exit of United States forces from Afghanistan after almost 2 decades of engagement in that country, in early August 2021, the Taliban was making strides fighting battles with security forces in various towns across the country in an effort to regain control. The reality was that by mid-August 2021, Western-backed Afghan forces had control over only central Afghanistan and portions in the east. Meanwhile, the Taliban was making an inexorable advance on the capital of Kabul. The appalling security landscape, one of turmoil, instability, and inevitable collapse of the democratically elected government of Afghanistan, compelled the United States and the United Kingdom to send thousands of troops to help evacuate their embassy staff and get citizens and Afghan allies to safe haven. Of particular significance was the need to evacuate Afghan translators and other personnel who had helped United States forces on the ground in Afghanistan for years and whose lives were now in imminent danger. Cognizant of the inevitable future collapse of the government of Afghanistan and the ensuing Taliban takeover, diplomats at the United States Embassy in Kabul were being instructed to destroy sensitive documents and equipment, including computers. Negotiations between international envoys, Afghan government emissaries, and Taliban representatives in Doha, Qatar, were attempting to find some sort of resolution. That effort appeared to offer grim prospects for the prospects of the future. Under discussion at the United Nations Security Council was a draft statement condemning the attacks by the Taliban, outlining punitive sanctions and warning that a future Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan under the Taliban would never be recognized by the international body. In the second week of August of 2021, defense officials in the United States were warning that the Taliban could conceivably lay siege on Kabul within a month and have complete control within 3 months. Only a few days after issuing that anticipated timeline, on August 14, 2021, United States intelligence agencies revised that timeline for the fall of Kabul to 72 hours. That 72 hours would prove to be wrong. The fall of Kabul was, in actuality, imminent. In an interview with CNN on August 12, 2021, General Mark Hertling noted that the problem for Afghanistan was that its government was weak, incompetent, and corrupt, and its people, including its own security forces, had little faith in the government's ability to deliver results. As reported in the New York Times, President Biden was himself frustrated by the incompetence of Afghanistan President Ashraf Ghani, who had not effectively executed a strategy to protect key cities. As to the corruption issue, the New York Times additionally noted that the Afghan government failed to pay many Afghan soldiers and also failed to provide proper water or food for troops, despite receiving funding from the United States. This effective dereliction of duty had led to low morale and defections from among the Afghan military. But low morale was only one part of the equation. Desertion from among the Afghan army was commonplace, and United States government inspectors had warned for years that the Afghan army was not reliable. That warning would turn out to be prescient. After years of US training on Afghan forces, there's little to show for it in regard to their willingness and determination to fight for Afghanistan. On the other side of the equation, the Taliban had the motivation, the conviction, the inspiration in the form of Islamic extremism and the will to win. As noted by General Mark Hertling, an army will fight for a government if it believes in it. The Taliban had that will, the Afghan army did not. The rapidity of the Taliban's consolidation of control across Afghanistan was likely a shock. Some officials anticipated that the exit of United States troops might result in Taliban advances over the course of a year or two. The success of the Taliban's assault in the course of mere weeks was at odds with Pentagon's expectations. Even after spending approximately 1 trillion, actually 2 trillion, in Afghanistan over the course of 2 decades, the Taliban still held control over some territory within the country. Significant portions remained under contestation, with Kabul and the central region being the areas most clearly under government control. Faced with the exit of United States forces, Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby argued that after 20 years of assistance and training, the Afghan forces had the resources necessary to defend their country. But despite the fact that there were an estimated 300,000 Afghan troops theoretically available to fight on behalf of their country and only 75,000 Taliban fighters, it was the Taliban who was seeing the military success. To return to the position of General Hertling that I mentioned earlier, an army will fight for a government it believes in. Regardless of the reprehensible and oppressive ideology of the extremist Taliban, it was apparent that its fighters had the conviction to overthrow the government, while Afghan forces had no will to fight for their own government and country. It was also the matter of conviction and will of the United States to continue its longest war. And the fact of the matter was that polling data consistently showed that a continued presence in Afghanistan was unpopular with the American people. We're exhorting Afghans to show political will when theirs depends on ours, and ours is gone. On August 15th, 2021, the Taliban advanced on the Afghan capital of Kabul, seizing control of the presidential palace and removing the Afghan flags from the building. Afghan President Ashraf Ghani fled the country by his words to avoid bloodshed. His destination, it was reported to be Tajikistan. According to the Afghanistan ambassador to Tajikistan, Ghani escaped with 169 million taken from state funds. Days later, Ghani resurfaced in the United Arab Emirates. With the effective collapse of the Afghan government, the Taliban was now in de facto control of the country where the United States-led international forces had operated for 20 years. Accordingly, the United States and its Western allies were focused on evacuating their personnel from Afghanistan and expediting visas for local Afghans who had helped them over the years and whose lives were now at risk. The total military deployment was now up to 6,000 troops to bring this effort to a close. For Afghans, unable to leave the country, the future looked grim. Of crucial concern would be the fate of Afghan women who had made gains during the 20 years of democratic governance, but who would now undoubtedly suffer the most brutal effects of the re-emerging re-Talibanization of Afghanistan. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres urged the international community to band together to help Afghans. He urged all countries to be willing to receive Afghan refugees and refrain from deportations. In the United States, President Biden was being pilloried in the news media and by the political opponents for the crisis-laden and chaotic exit of United States personnel and forces, as well as allies from Afghanistan. Of note was the commentary from the top Republican in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, who cast it as a monumental collapse. Senator Mitt Romney accused Biden of failing to acknowledge the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. Political posturing aside, there were genuine concerns to be addressed regarding the collapse of the Afghan government and a stunning, swift seizure of power by the Taliban. One question being asked was how this could happen. Another question was how Biden could order the withdrawal without proper planning. A third question was how it was possible that the United States was unprepared for the rapidity of the Taliban takeover and the collapse of the democratically elected government of Afghanistan. A fourth question was how the Taliban was able to so easily cruise into Kabul with little or no resistance from Afghan security forces and seize power almost bloodlessly. A fifth question was more a matter of ethical dilemma. How could the United States abandon the Afghans after 20 years in country? Some of the answers might come from Ahmad Ahmadi, the central bank governor of Afghanistan. By his own account, he tweeted, "The collapse of the government of Afghanistan this past week was so swift and complete, it was disorienting and difficult to comprehend." He noted that the president, vice presidents, cabinet ministers, and several members of parliament had fled the country. "It did not have to end this way," he said. "I'm disgusted by the lack of planning by Afghan leadership." Ahmadi's account clearly illustrates that the catastrophe in Afghanistan was not one anticipated by those in power in Kabul. If the collapse of the government of Afghanistan was a shock to the government of Afghanistan in Kabul, then it is conceivable that it was also a shock to the government of the United States in Washington, D.C. It was evident that the United States government believed that it had more time to execute an exit and was caught unprepared for the stunning rapidity of the seizure of by the Taliban of Kabul and the concomitant collapse of Afghanistan. Now it was being forced to operate in a haphazard manner under crisis conditions to get people out of the country. As to the question of how the Taliban could so easily seize power and with little resistance from the Afghan army, the answer likely resides in propaganda, psychological warfare, and deal-making. Despite signing a deal with the Trump administration in the United States, the Taliban did not cease its attack on the Afghan government. In fact, it ramped up its attacks on the army and local security forces. Furthermore, it went on a killing spree against human rights activists and journalists, creating a climate of fear and terror across the country and providing life and death examples of Taliban power. The climate of fear and terror was exacerbated by the Taliban's propaganda operation and psychological warfare. The Taliban was texting soldiers and officials in key communities, telling them to surrender, cooperate, or be faced with terrible consequences. The Taliban was delivering the same message to village elders and tribal leaders. Safety was promised in exchange for cooperation with the Taliban. Similar deals were being forged with government officials, provincial governors, and other functionaries. As to the famed warlords of Afghanistan who had commanded their own militias and were expected to defend their strongholds, as they watched their government failing to protect the country, they fled the country as well. The bottom line, the stunning success of the Taliban in taking control of Afghanistan was the result of Afghan politicians, tribal leaders, local officials, soldiers, and militia fighters understanding that their survival relied on surrender, the brutal and devastating effect on ordinary Afghanistans notwithstanding. Indeed, the message received by most Afghans, with or without governing power, was that surrender was a viable option for survival. Given the abandonment of the country and the people of Afghanistan by the very government of Afghanistan, that it was conceivable of the entire idea of stabilizing Afghanistan for a 20-year period was notional at best and an illusion at worst. Thus arises the ethical dilemma for America. How could the United States abandon the Afghans in their hour of need after 20 years in that country? President Biden sought to answer that question with a speech on August 16th. In that speech, President Biden admitted that intelligence failures led to the unanticipated rapid takeover by the Taliban. President Biden also took full responsibility for not only the clearly botched exit from Afghanistan, saying it was hard and messy, but also for the broader decision to withdraw from that country after 20 years, saying in unambiguous terms, "The buck stops with me." President Biden nevertheless placed the lion's share of blame on Afghans, arguing, "How many more generations of America's daughters and sons would you have me send to fight Afghanistan's civil war when Afghan troops will not?" And the reality was that the continued engagement of the United States military in Afghanistan was essentially mission creep, along with impossible nation building in a complicated, traditionally ordered, and tribally decentralized country like Afghanistan. President Biden used the cataclysmic events of mid-August 2021 to reinforce his conviction that the withdrawal from Afghanistan was the only possible option and the right decision. He said, if anything, the developments of the past week reinforces that ending US military involvement in Afghanistan now was the right decision. You can find the full remarks from the United States President at the White House website. Next week, I will cover a reminder of the history that brought the United States foreign policy and military engagement in Afghanistan to the pivotal point of collapse in August of 2021. At the end of August 2021, the public will be able to purchase my comprehensive Afghanistan withdrawal report available from the Country Watch website at www.countrywatch.com. May God be with the people of Afghanistan, and God bless our troops who have fought so valiantly for 20 years. Thank you for your time, and remember that we live in an interconnected world.